Great. Great. We have the recording started. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Kate McCusker, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist for the Oregon Department of State Lands, and I will be your moderator for this session. So thank you for taking the time to join us and learning more about the Forest Management Plan draft for the Elliott State Research Forest. I'm going to go over our agenda really briefly, how to provide public comment, and then we will get started with the presentation. First, we'll hear opening comments from our Department of State Lands Director, Vicki Walker, and followed by an overview of our draft plan presented by our department's Elliott State Forest Transition Director, Brett Brownscombe, as well as our forester, Ryan Singleton. This presentation will highlight in particular what has changed since the Oregon State University initially submitted a draft forest management plan. Following the presentation, we will have time for some questions. If you do have a question about what is being presented, just please jot it down and we'll take those questions after the presentation. Following the Q&A, the remaining time we'll be hearing from any of the attendees. And so let's see, I've got a little preview up here on how you can provide input today. And I'll share the screen again when we get to that part. But just a heads up, that is how we will be handling that. And for those of you who want to provide comments in writing, you can share those comments via email to elliottproject.dsl@oregon.gov through Sunday, July 28th. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. Just please keep yourself muted. And as you heard, we'll be recording today's session, and I will make that session available on the project webpage on the DSL website afterwards. And with that, I will hand it over to our first speaker, Director Walker.
Okay, great. I want to make sure I'm not muted. All right, great. Thank you. And it appears that as of right now, Kent, you are our only attendee. That may change. This is the fourth meeting I think we've had, fourth or fifth. So we've had other folks show up. And there is Alyssa now. So good. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Kent and Alyssa, for joining us this evening. And as I mentioned, this is our fourth public hearing. Today, Brett Brownscombe, who's on your screen as well, he's the Elliott State Research Forest Transition Director. And Ryan Singleton is also on your screen, and he is our most excellent forester. And they both will provide a high-level overview of our draft forest management plan. And that is a body of work that has been a long time in the making and will continue to evolve over the coming months with input from you and the community and tribes and a range of partners. So creation of the Elliott State Research Forest remains a huge priority for Oregon, for the Land Board, and for our agency. This work will have significant value nationally and internationally. We've been on the Elliott journey a long while, beginning with the 2018 advisory group that our agency formed at the direction of the Land Board to keep the forest public and explore its transformation into a research forest. That advisory group process resulted in a remarkable collaborative agreement on a research forest design, including across 3 tribes, conservation groups, timber interests, and school association interests, among others. And while the research forest design has evolved significantly through that community input, those consultations, government negotiations, and advisory group collaboration and feedback, we maintain the foundational commitments advanced by the advisory group and endorsed by the Land Board. And as you know, the Land Board is the governor, the treasurer, and the Secretary of State. These commitments include the principles and allocation types adopted through the process, a working research forest that produces timber, around 17 to 20 million board feet on a 4-year rolling average. Conservation outcomes, including but not limited to a habitat conservation plan that is currently in process that Brett will talk about later, and mission, governance, and management policies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett to give a couple of brief comments, and then he'll go through the draft forest management plan from a high level view, because there are multiple pages and we're not going over every page, but we'll take you through each chapter and give you a general idea of what each chapter is. And Ryan will have a role to play in that conversation when we get to the point where we're talking about the timber management. So Brett, I'll turn over to you.
Well, super. Thanks, Vicki. And hi, everybody. Or at least, hello, Kent, and hello, Alyssa. Or Lisa, I'm sorry if I'm not mispronouncing it. My name is Brett Brownscombe. I'm the Department of State Lands, Elliott State Forest Transition Director. And so working on the transition of the forest to the Elliott State Research Forest. And to kick off my part on this, the Forest Management Plan is really a critical final piece in creating the Elliott State Research Forest. We have, let's see here. Can you go to the next slide, Kate? Perfect. That's great. What you see here is where we are, where the department is in our overall work plan for creating the Elliott State Research Forest, and the Forest Management Plan is row 4. And you'll see that highlighted on this slide. And thankfully, we had a lot of really good work to build upon in crafting the Department of State Lands draft Forest Management Plan. We built off of and based this effort on earlier efforts advanced by Oregon State University and their College of Forestry beginning in 2022 and concluding last December when they submitted their Forest Management Plan to Department of State Lands. Our next steps as we advance our draft revised Forest Management Plan is to take this plan in once we've digested and refined it and revised it based on public comment, to take the plan to the State Land Board in October for their consideration. Both to us at the department and to the Land Board, public and community input and engagement is in this process is really important. So please weigh in with your thoughts, questions tonight or in writing before our July 28th public comment deadline. And before we kick off, thank you for coming, just to make sure that's said. And also, Director Walker, thank you for making time. I know it's evening and people have things to do usually in the evening other than Forest Management Plan public listening sessions. So we appreciate you all who are here, and then Director Walker and everybody else on staff at DSL2. Thank you for the assistance in these engagement sessions. So what is the Elliott State Research Forest? And this may be old news to you who are watching or listening. And I guess full caveat, this is a highly abbreviated background and description of the forest and its history, but here we go at a high level. So the main area of the Elliott is a contiguous 18 by 16 mile tract of forest land in the Oregon Coast Range between the towns of Coos Bay and North Bend to the southwest and Reedsport to the northwest. The Elliott State Research Forest boundary also now includes East Hackey Ridge, which is a 788 acre parcel that is located to the north side of the forest in the lower Umpqua watershed. The Hannis or Coos and the Quitich or lower Umpqua peoples are the original people and the original stewards of the lands that we now refer to as the Elliott State Research Forest. And their connection to and interest in this landscape and its future remain important. In 1930, the current 83,000 acre Elliott State Forest was established as Oregon's first ever state forest on these ancestral lands. And for several decades, beginning in the 1950s, the Elliott was an asset of the state common school fund. And as such, it helped fund Oregon public schools through revenue produced by timber harvests or from timber harvests. And beginning in 2013 or thereabouts, endangered species litigation had largely halted timber sales on the Elliott. And in response, and after significant controversy around approaches on what to do to address conflicting direction tied to litigation and the state common school fund, the Oregon State Land Board developed a vision for the Elliott as a public forest that has completed its obligation to funding Oregon schools and is moving forward in the shape you see now, or the direction you see now, as a research forest. And so today, through actions that the State Land Board and legislature have taken, the Elliott has been decoupled from its state common school fund responsibilities and obligations for to produce funding for the school fund. And the Elliott's transitioning to one of the nation's largest and most unique public research forests, we're happy to say. And as you may know, the Elliott is comprised of all state lands, state public lands under the jurisdiction of the Land Board and managed by its administrative agency, us, the Department of State Lands, through guidance provided by the State Land Board's confirmed Elliott State Research Forest Board of Directors. The next slide is the map of the Elliott. So what you see here in red and purple are the lands that are included within the boundary of the Elliott State Research Forest. And you'll also notice to the left or on the west portion of this map, you'll see a red dot labeled Shutter Creek. And this is the 49-acre former state correctional institution that the Department of State Lands has acquired as the potential headquarters for the Elliott State Research Forest, as well as a partnership, community and partnership center. This is not a definite outcome to transition Shutter Creek to that purpose, but we're exploring that. And discussions are part of a separate process from this forest management plan process. And that process on the future of Shutter Creek will, if all goes well, begin later this year. So the next slide is the State Land Board's vision for the Elliott. And I won't read these verbatim, but when the work on the Elliott as a potential research forest began in earnest back in around 2017, these were the fundamental North Star goals and principles that the Land Board advanced. So public ownership, keeping the Elliott public, decoupling it from its obligations to fund the State Common School Fund, and then also compensating the State Common School Fund, continuing habitat conservation and including through a habitat conservation plan, and then providing for multiple benefits, not just conservation and timber harvest, but recreation, education, and working forest research have been driving our focus and the Land Board's focus since roughly 2017. And that continues through this draft FMP. The timeline that we're on for this work is here on this slide, and you can see highlighted in yellow where we are now. After receiving Oregon State's initial Forest Management Plan in December of 2023, we at Department of State Lands began a process to review and revise that draft. And the broad goals of our process are based on the draft that is before you and out in public now. And we're not, like Director Walker said, going to go through every page tonight, but it is out there published for your review and hopefully comment. We want to make sure that this process provides community members and partners with the information that you need, and to create opportunities for you to give us at the department feedback on the draft plan over the course of this summer, culminating in a revised plan that we would take in a summary of what we've heard from the public, which we would take to the land board in October to make a decision on the forest management plan. So informing the plan is not just tonight in this public engagement process in these listening sessions. There are other venues captured in these white circles here or in other forms of engagement that the department's advancing as part of moving from a draft to a final proposed forest management plan. And that includes collecting input from the variety of entities that you see here: tribal government, state and local, and federal agencies, the Elliott State Research Forest Board, in addition to our public-facing public engagement process. And so what this means is your comments tonight, as well as anything that you submit in writing online or otherwise, snail mail still works, will be reviewed by the department staff and considered in the final draft plan presented to the board this fall. So please let us know what you think. Now, the high-level slide next here is what is a forest management plan? And really, it's our guiding document that we intend to use to demonstrate how the Elliott will be managed to sustain the diverse values on the forest and tied to the forest, and address fundamental research questions regarding working forests in the context of pressures like climate change, and how we plan to achieve outcomes envisioned by stakeholders for the Elliott over the long planning process that's going on or been going on through collaboration since 2017. The current draft plan was crafted with the foundational guidance provided by the original Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee, which included 3 tribes as well as other diverse interests, and also informed by the 2021 Oregon State University research proposal that was advanced through that advisory committee effort, input from the land board, tribal consultation and engagement, and input over time from the department's Elliott Advisory Group efforts, whether it was a prospective board or an advisory group in title. So the purpose of the plan is to provide the decision makers that are, immediately ahead with the land board, staff at DSL, researchers, administrators, contractors, practitioners doing work on the forest, and partners, all of them, with the foundational direction and practical guidance to implement the Elliott's integrated approach to research and management. What I wanted to get into next is, as noted, the department's plans based on a lot of comprehensive and thorough work done by Oregon State College of Forestry and the plan that it submitted last December. We have retained much of the information and direction in that OSU plan. So if you engaged in that forest management plan development process from 2022 to 2023 or so, you should see a good bit that's familiar. But that said, the department's plan, our draft, does advance some meaningful changes, which we'll cover at a high level in the slides that follow. But to note a couple things initially, one significant change worth mentioning is the shift away from Oregon State University management of the Elliott and into Department of State Lands management of the Elliott, which occurred based on events in late 2023 and subsequent state land board direction. And part of that reality is we at the department are not ourselves a research entity. And as such, we're not the entity to advance the research specific side of the Elliott State Research Forest. We need a research partner to do that. And we recognize that, and our draft forest management plan reflects it. So while we're advancing this plan, we're also in conversation with Oregon State about whether the university will play that role of lead research partner or whether we look to other entities. Also important to note up front is that what our draft plan does not do and does not intend to do right now. So one, it holds space for that research partner conversation to play out that I just mentioned. Also, there's on the horizon development of a formal recreation and education plan tied to the Elliott that would nest within this forest management plan, but it's a process, a separate process tied to those subjects that would play out later. This draft plan also holds space for conversations that are ongoing with Western Oregon tribes related to integrating indigenous interests through management and research on the forest. And that's an important conversation. It has connections to potential partnerships, but also equity and other important outcomes. And so while our plan has a lot of language, you'll see in the draft, if you haven't read it already, that reflects our desire for this kind of indigenous integration of indigenous interests, but we are intentionally wanting to respect the time frame that tribes want for this conversation. And so it's not intended to be all buttoned up right now in this draft. The last part is while we intend to develop and approve the forest management plan for the Elliott this October, I guess all of what I just said, the intent is to express to you that it's a living document and important further work remains that will be part of updating this plan in the future. So now we dive into the chapters, and between myself and Ryan, we'll do a high-level overview of the 12 chapters in the draft, the department's draft FMP. And starting with chapter 1, this is really the guiding principles and vision that the forest has had and that have existed on the forest since the original advisory committee, as well as the 2021 research proposal or research forest proposal. But we did update this chapter with the description of the forest history to include the events that have happened recently. So from 2023 onward. And we've also revised this chapter to really hit on and reflect the Land Board's foundational framing of its intentions for the research forest. Chapter 1 does retain the details that folks may have seen in the Oregon State Plan, and those details relate to the forest's overall history, its regulatory context, and biophysical setting, as well as the social, economic, and cultural conditions tied to the forest. There was a lot of good and comprehensive work in the Oregon State FMP on that front, and we felt it should be retained. Chapter 2 incorporates the governance structure adopted by the Land Board this past April, including the Elliott Board of Directors and its role. This chapter also covers the organizational structure related to staffing and contract, what we would contract out and what we would staff internally. And that structure has evolved since January of this year through the department's advisory group process. So that covers the role, this chapter also speaks to the roles and responsibilities of research partners and the process for both proposing and advancing research and data management on the forest. Regarding revenue, this is in this chapter, you'll see it makes clear that the department intends multiple sources of revenue to support the research forest. And part of that is revenue from timber harvest, but it also includes anticipated revenue from a voluntary carbon project, as well as other funding sources, including grants, federal funds, and philanthropy. The chapter 2 speaks to financial viability as well and includes a current draft budget, given that financial viability is not just a matter of revenue, but cost management as well. And updated modeling work, both timber and carbon related, will occur over the course of this forest management plan process and will result in updates that will reflect in the financial estimates as part of the final FMP. The next slide is tied to partnerships, and really to be successful, we feel that strong and effective partnerships between the department and the many different entities who hold unique expertise is really going to be critical to the research forest success. So this chapter speaks to research partnerships and the department's intent to continue that conversation with Oregon State or elsewhere if that doesn't work out. The chapter also addresses our intent and desire for tribal partnerships. And we've retained valuable content advanced in the OSU plan, including principles for working with indigenous peoples and knowledge that have been advanced through broader efforts of Oregon State and its College of Forestry with tribes more broadly. The chapter also speaks to state and federal agency partnerships. There are several important partnerships there and that can be grown and need to be grown on the horizon. Finally, this is the chapter that covers education and recreation planning. And so as noted, it speaks to the need for the future formal planning efforts on both subjects that we intend to do. And it includes the principles and the process that the department would use to advance those planning efforts, which are what was in the Oregon State FMP as well. So again, the plan, our FMP, assuming it's adopted in October, would be updated in the future based on those recreation and education planning efforts. And in the meantime, we wanted to clarify in this chapter that current opportunities and approaches to recreation and education on the forest would continue. We're not shutting recreation down on the forest while we wait to do more planning, but future planning will add more structure and enhancement of that public value. Chapter 4. This next slide covers at a high level what's in chapter 4. And just to note, this is an important chapter. It's the one, while we're advancing foundational content found in the Oregon State Forest Management Plan that's based on original advisory committee collaborative agreements. This is the chapter that covers some of the key differences that are being advanced in the department's draft forest management plan. And we intend to advance both more focus and flexibility in certain areas than was in the OSU plan. And notably, while the department's draft plan advances the same underlying geospatial or sub-watershed allocations on the research forest, the DSL draft is proposing more flexibility in the management approaches for what's called out as extensive and intensive forest management. And further, while not precluding the advancement of a triad design or a spare and share research approach, the DSL draft plan doesn't require it to be at the same scale or advanced in the same way as previously described. The DSL draft advances a unifying research question and 5 themes, which is similar to what the OSU plan did. And we feel there's room there for long-term research that within that framework is not rigidly or necessarily rigidly tied to the triad research design. So this is something that DSL intends to, or is advancing with the intent of being responsive to what we've heard along the way from the public, tribes, advisory group members, or other entities to date. And it's something that where we really want input. We want public comment on it. And we intend to refine the draft plan from now until the final form based on the feedback we get on this issue, as well as the ongoing research partner conversation with Oregon State. Finally, the DSL draft places a lot more focus on carbon and biodiversity management. We have proposed in this draft plan a new designation known as, or called out as, carbon and biodiversity management areas. And those areas would advance more flexibility in achieving carbon and biodiversity outcomes than the conservation research watershed. So allowing for ecological or indigenous forestry, but not intensive forestry. And we're also, apart from that designation, intending to advance longer rotations as part of carbon and wood product production while still allowing flexibility to manage the shorter rotations where that's necessary for financial viability or for advancement of a research plan. And finally, we've clarified that our biodiversity management approaches are inclusive and they do focus on old growth and old structure development and habitat, but also on development of complex early sterile habitat. So before I kick to Ryan, the next chapter, chapter 5, is a quick and easy one, and that's because it's blank in the draft forest management plan that you'll see. And the reason for that is the key components that were in chapter 5 and the OSU FMP have been moved into DSL draft or our draft FMP's chapter 2 on governance. And that includes the Science Advisory Committee and its role, which DSL would form in order to assist the planning and development of research, as well as the adaptation of research and management over time. This committee would work with the lead research partner and the Elliott board in advancing research plans through the Elliott's governance structure. And we felt it was important to have that Science Advisory Committee in the governance structure chapter instead of elsewhere. And with that, Ryan, I would love to pass to you. Ryan, again, is our forester, and we'll cover some additional chapters, and I'll come back and tie it off for questions.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, Ryan Singleton, State Lands Forester here. And so I got 4 chapters I'll run through here pretty quickly. The first one is chapter 6, which is silviculture, harvest systems, and operations planning. So this chapter details the approaches to the various forest management allocations on the Elliott and the elements also contained in biennial operations plans, which we're in the middle of developing the first one now. It also contains details on the various treatment allocations, such as intensive, extensive, ecological, and restoration treatments, those that would be implemented. And then this chapter also includes creating flexibility based on what was mentioned by Brett earlier in chapter 4, and holds a space for landing spot on carbon and biodiversity management planning areas. So the goals and objectives for these approaches have been rearranged from the OSU plan due to the department not being a research entity. So our goals and objectives start with those that are management focused. And finally, this chapter speaks to the various harvest systems that would be used on the Elliott. So Kate will move on to chapter 7. There we go. Aquatic and riparian systems. So this chapter includes a description of aquatic resources, stream classifications, watershed delineations, and riparian buffer protections that are unique to the Elliott, and underlying approach to its design captured in the 2021 OSU proposal, research proposal. And so this chapter is largely unchanged. Pretty much what you saw in the OSU plan or FMP is what you're seeing in this particular FMP. So it also covers intended aquatic conservation restoration strategy related to steep slopes, wood and sediment recruitment, as well as riparian thinning operations. This chapter also includes a section on roads, as well as other intended restoration projects, including the commitment to a roads assessment during the first 12 years of the Elliott management. And then finally, it covers connections to partner efforts, such as those like we have with the Coos Watershed Association. We'll move on to chapter 8. So this is climate change, adaptive silviculture, and forest carbon. Some of this, you've heard portions of this earlier from Brett's talk in earlier chapters, but this one specifically does address carbon sequestration and climate considerations. And they're a more central part of this draft plan as compared to Oregon State's version. This chapter places the plan in the context of the state's broader policy directives and plans related to carbon and climate. It speaks to forest carbon markets and values associated with pursuing a voluntary market project, as well as climate smart forestry approaches. Overall, the Elliott intends to demonstrate and research different approaches to forestry and working forest viability in the context of climate pressures. As part of that, this chapter speaks to climate resilience, adaptation strategies, and identifies needed research areas. We'll go on to chapter 9. So we got species conservation here. So the Elliott provides suitable habitat for over 200 species, including most native species found in Oregon Coast Range forests or Coast Range forests in general. The OSU plan sets forth a plan to approach multi-species conservation strategies. The department's draft plan retains this with some slight changes in strategy to clarify that restoration work is part of conservation area management and expands the biodiversity strategy beyond just monitoring. This plan carries forward the distinction between species covered by the Endangered Species Act and broader biodiversity intentions, both of which the research force intends to advance. The connection to the Oregon Conservation Strategy is also referenced and advanced in other parts of this plan. One distinction with this chapter you'll see is that there's a distinction between, there's a revision to the marbled mirrorlet experimental design, which remains as the department's plan, but with management and research focused on opportunities apart from the original 1,400-acre harvest experiment in occupied habitat, which has been removed from both the Habitat Conservation Plan as well as this draft FMP. Otherwise, this plan carries forward most of the content and depth that the Oregon State Plan set forth in this chapter. And with that, Brett, we'll go back to you for the final couple of chapters here, 10, 11, and 12, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is our monitoring chapter, and it speaks to our commitments and intentions for monitoring on the Elliott. This includes both monitoring that we're committed to doing as part of the Habitat Conservation Plan, but also broader monitoring for broader values. And related to that, we're in positive conversations right now with Oregon State on deploying the $3.5 million in federal funds that OSU received years back for monitoring and equipment on the Elliott. And we're working on an approach to near-term baseline monitoring collection. And it's ongoing, and our intent is to update our draft plan based on where this effort lands between now and October. Chapter 11 speaks to adaptive management and our intention to remain adaptive both in management and research on the Elliott. Advancing long-term research and management is really core to the Elliott's mission. And adapting these efforts based on what we're learning along the way is we feel critical. The last slide, chapter 12, this chapter is largely carried forward from the Oregon State Plan. It covers a key area for the future of forest management and research, not just because disturbance-based pressures on forests are expected to increase with climate change, but because past and ongoing research are presenting a different understanding of disturbance dynamics on forest health and resilience, and that includes wildfire, but also landslide and sediment delivery and the like. And we intend the Elliott to be a place where natural disturbance does happen and play out over time, but we are advancing, just to be clear, wildfire protection on the Elliott, but in addition to natural disturbances that happen, we're also intending the forest to be a place where management mimics certain disturbances. And the understanding of wildfire, including indigenous burning, as well as other disturbance dynamics, like I mentioned, related to aquatic habitat development and sediment delivery, both in shaping forest structure and overall habitat conditions, is really an important and desired area of focus. And so chapter 12 speaks to that. So with that, Kate, I'll say thank you to everybody again who showed up and is here with us, and we'd like to hear from you. So I think, Kate, I'll pass it back to you to get us started on the next part of our night.
Great. So thank you, Brett and Ryan. We do have a few minutes for some questions. So if you have a question, whichever you prefer, you could either use the Q&A function, which you'll find a button at the bottom of your screen, and you could type your question in. But if you would prefer to speak your question aloud, just use the raise hand function, and I'll just call on you. And our speakers will do their best to answer your question today. Please reserve your comments. If you have comments about the plan, we will be doing that in the next part, but we will be taking questions now. And I'll just give it 1 minute, and then if we don't have questions, we can speed on through to the comment part. Alyssa or Elisa, please feel free to let me know how to pronounce it correctly.
It's Elisa. Hi, thank you. So I got interested in the Elliott a long time ago. I'm a writer, and I'm really interested in sort of the different dynamics between the timber industry and environmental activists and advocates. And I'm also really interested in what you've been talking about today around like just working with tribes more. And so I was curious, I have a few questions, but my first one I think is just if you can speak a little bit more to the tribe's priorities. I know it sounds like you're still in conversation with them, but.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. I'll try. And I'm hesitating because we're reluctant to speak for somebody else's priorities, but in terms of what we hear and have heard consistently, including through the advisory committee collaborative process that started in 2018, is based on the history of the priorities start with the land and what the land meant to tribes for first foods, cultural practices, just with their way of life and their notion of stewardship and connection. And so there's been a history of disconnection of tribes from these lands. And that is a complex area in I'd say overall, but certainly in this geography as well. And that happened in the not too distant past, or in the grand scope of history, and governments that are still here today at the state and federal level were tied to that, and there are ongoing tensions over what happened, and ongoing interest, I'd say, on the part of tribes in reconnecting to ancestral lands and restoring their culture and their practices and their notions of stewardship and being valued in the context of management and research. And so I won't delve deeper into that, but those are some of the high level things that we've heard. And I don't know, Ryan or Vicky, if you want to elaborate on that at all, but I guess the other point in this is every tribe is its own sovereign government. And so we're trying to listen and not broad brush the various tribes, and even a lot of the tribes are confederated. And so even within one tribe, it's complex.
I would agree with that, Brett. And in particular, there are 3 different people that make up several of the tribes, the Hanas, the Kus, and the Quish, and they integrated with other tribes. So you may find members of those tribes with the Cow Creek, the Coquel, the Grand Ronde. The government pushed the tribes around, as you well know. And so they, in some ways, became nomads and traveled. So it took a long while and for tribes to reclaim their place in this country. And we're doing our best to work with each of them, each of the 5 Western tribes. We're focusing on the 5 Western tribes because they're the ones that have the most, excuse me, I have been having a bit of a cold the last week. They're the tribes that have been most connected to the Elliott. And we've had government to government consultations with the tribes, and we've also had staff to staff consultations, and those continue and will continue no matter what happens with the Elliott.
Thank you both, and thank you, Elisa, for your question. We have another question from Bob Zybuck in the Q&A here. It's related. So tribal members have a long history in logging, firefighting, and tree planting. Are those activities considered as traditional practices as well? And are there any efforts to hire tribal members for doing work on the Elliott itself?
Yeah, thanks, Bob, for that question. Yeah, we are working with the tribes to define what their stewardship activities, how they would define their stewardship activities on the Elliott. But like you're pointing out, it's not, it goes beyond first food approaches, and those management approaches that you mentioned are valuable, and we hold them as valuable. And I think, as you probably know, the diversity of tribes and perspectives on how to approach forest management is out there, and we're working with that. And as to the question of hiring, what we're working through, we haven't gotten to that yet. We're stepping through the, when I started with the work plan slide on the 6 steps that it takes for us to get through to create the Elliott State Research Forest. After we do that, we'll be into the operations and management phase. And the FMP speaks to opportunities for partnership engagement with tribes, and that would include engagement in actual work on the ground. We haven't gotten there yet because although we plan to, in 2025, start management and active management on the Elliott again, we're not there yet. But we do intend to and want to engage tribes in partnership, and where there are opportunities that tribal capacity and skills and interests where they exist around management on the Elliott, where we can integrate those, and including through contracting. We would like to do that, and to some degree, we've reached out and are doing that right now in operations planning. We'd also like to, as I explained, we're holding open the chapter on how exactly Indigenous management and research looks on the Elliott, and so we'd like to play that out with the tribes on working with them to help us define what it would look like to do prescriptions tied to Indigenous forestry or their approaches to forestry on the Elliott. and what it would look like to tackle research in ways that get at tribal interests or indigenous interests and values. And so a lot of right now is still in listening mode and trying to build partnership.
Thank you, Brett. Bob has a follow-up question, which I think folks have kind of addressed already. Sort of, it's the approach to how the tribal partners were selected. So Bob shared this is the ancestral lands of the CT Klutsi, using all 5 tribes as contacts. Would that be similar to allowing Oregonians to vote in California or Washington? So I think the question being sort of more how tribal partners were engaged or chosen to be engaged. And I think, Vicki, you commented on sort of the Western tribes and the nomad and being also forcibly moved to other areas. So if you have anything else you'd like to add to that.
No, I think we've answered that. That's Bob's that's Bob's opinion, and that's okay. And we can just move on to the next question.
Great. We do have more time for more questions. Again, feel free to write in the Q&A or raise your hand if you prefer to speak your question. Otherwise, I will move on to our comment time. I'll give it a moment. Elisa.
Hello again. So I have not been able to follow this as closely as I would like. And so I was hoping that someone might be able to just give a quick insight into what the plan will mean for timber jobs. Will they increase, decrease, stay the same, change in nature, that kind of stuff?
Sure. Ryan, do you want to take that one on? I mean, relative to the current, the status
Yeah,
quo
well,
on the Elliott is,
yeah, because it's a pretty simple answer, Alyssa. It's right now we don't have any timber rolling out of the Elliott, so there's no logging going on right now, and it's been idle since 2017. So yeah, by nature, when this plan gets adopted and our HCP ITP is in hand, we will be able to proceed, hopefully starting in 2025. And so, once that's all in place and we start doing treatments of the landscape, then
The HCP and the I, just sorry, could you spell those out?
Sorry, Habitat Conservation Plan and an incidental take permit. Sorry,
the acronym,
I've
please,
been
just showed
so
up.
engrossed in this stuff. It's just the acronyms flow out. So, thanks, Kate. So yes, right now there's really no timber jobs, but we will start producing timber jobs once we start harvesting on the Elliott. So it will increase and hopefully sustain through time.
Okay, and so I was there in 2022 just for a few days in July, and I did see trucks on the roads with timber. So was that just like little private parcels checkerboarded through, or?
So good question. So if you were actually on the Elliott and you saw log trucks going out on some of those roads, we have there's easements from adjacent private landowners and also Oregon Department of Forestry that have still remained active. So what you saw there would not have come off of this Elliott State Forest, but it could have been off ODF's portion of it, or more likely probably Weyerhaeuser, which is next door.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's still like part of the Elliott, but just not part that you guys are managing or working toward managing.
Yeah, so ODF, the Board of Forestry, ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry has about 9,000 acres that's in and around the 83 plus thousand acres that is part of this research plan. That is, the ownership is the Department of State lands.
Okay, thank
Hope that
you.
makes sense.
Kind of, yeah. I think I need a 3D map or something, but yeah, I know there's always a lot of
Yeah, Brett, we do have a map like that
There-
that shows the ownership. I don't know if you have.
Yeah,
There
there is
you
one in
go.
chapter, it should be in chapter 1.
Yeah, so
Uh,
Elisa, if you look at those blue blocks within the red of the Elliott, those are
Mhm.
those are the pieces owned by ODF.
Okay.
Yep.
And there, we call that one in the middle the bullseye, because it's right in the middle. And we were looking at one time to try to acquire that to be within the Elliott. It would require us to trade forest land with ODF to do that. And we haven't found suitable land to do that with, but that could be a future possibility. And ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry, excuse me, they're having to obtain a habitat conservation plan for their parcels too. So they'll be working on getting a habitat conservation plan in those blue squares, as well as the work that we're doing in the red portion.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up question, Elisa, or is that helpful?
No, that's helpful. I think, yeah, I don't want to take up too much of the comment period, because I think a lot of my questions will just be answered over time as things develop, but yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more question that Kent shared, and then I think we'll shift to the comment period, just to keep that balance. So Kent, oh, I'm sorry, Kent, I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce your last name correctly. Doughty? Asked, is the Elliott within forest lands where barred owl management is being implemented?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kent. So it is not being implemented there yet, but we are committed to doing it. And that's in conjunction with conservation efforts related to northern spotted owl. And the commitment is in our proposed habitat conservation plan, and that would include doing barred owl management on the Elliott, but also working with adjacent landowners on a barred owl management plan. Given that, like fish, owls don't respect political boundaries necessarily, and so the success or lack thereof of barred owl removal efforts in northern spotted owl conservation efforts is really dependent on a broader effort, but we are committed to doing it on the Elliott, and that was part of our habitat conservation plan negotiations.
Thank you, Brett. And did you have a follow-up question on that, or did that answer your question?
That answered.
Okay. Great. All right. I will, with that, just kind of shift us to the comment period, which is just a reminder, the last reminder, maybe not the last reminder, maybe I'll tell you one more time, but comments through July 28th, Sunday, to this email address, elliottproject.dsl@oregon.gov. And again, you can give verbal comments tonight. And with that, we'll just do 2. If you're on the phone, click *9. If you're here online, you can click the raised hand function. If you can't find it, you can turn your camera on and raise your hand to the camera. It's a little tricky to find sometimes. So yeah, comment period. And if you're more of a writer, that's totally fine too. Just submit your comments in writing.
Yeah, Lisa or others, feel free to fair game if you want to just ask fire off questions while we're here. We're happy to go either way. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about, or all of you, what you're thinking about the forest and the direction and the plan, one way or the other. But question and answers can be helpful too.
Okay, well, their comments that we've heard over the last, today is our last listening session. The comments that we've heard in the 4 listening sessions we've held this week, as well as any that we get in writing, will all be considered and summarized thematically in a community engagement report, as well as considered in the actual changes to the forest management plan itself. And so I just wanted to let you know where those are going. I think if we don't have any comments, I may give you back a half hour of your evening. Oh, did I hear a voice?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry. I didn't see you on the screen.
Okay. This comment isn't about the Native Americans, but my concern with this plan for 5 years has been the artificial and arbitrary limitation to 17 million board feet a year logged off the Elliott. I have no idea why there's that restriction. The Elliott grows 60 to 80 million feet a year, has a well-documented history of catastrophic wildfires, and now we're building up a 30 or 40,000 acre quasi-wilderness right to the east of several inhabited communities on the coast. And those are going to be increasingly subject to fire as long as only 17 million feet a year are logged, if they ever actually start logging on it again. And the idea to leave snags there is totally ahistorical. That's never happened before. It's going to create very, very serious wildfire problems. And I'm curious, and it's the main reason I've never contributed to this planning process. The arbitrary limit on 17 million board feet a year is a guaranteed loss economically and a guaranteed increase in the risk of catastrophic wildfire over time. The Elliott's had at least 10 major wildfires since 1560s. The wildfire plan on the Elliott is silly. It's some tree rings and a computer printout of a fire return interval that was disproven 30 years ago with research we did on the Elliott fire history at that time. So I'm concerned about that. I think the plan is just doomed to failure if there's such an arbitrary limit on harvest. And I really don't understand, along with the CT Clusie, why you would create a 30,000 acre quasi-wilderness right to the east of several communities, and most of it's plantations, and it's not even natural habitat, or certainly not critical habitat. So that's my concern. I don't need an answer to it, but it's definitely a restriction in the ability of anybody to manage the forest over time in a safe and economical manner.
Thank you for your comment, Bob. Again, we'll definitely add that the verbal comments and written comments will be taken into consideration for the plan. And if you have any additional questions, you can send them to Brett at brettbrownscombe@dsl.oregon.gov. And oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And I think, unless we have any more comments or questions, I'm going to close today's session. And thank you for your time on a Thursday evening. And hope to see your written comments as well if you want to submit more by July 28th. Okay. Thank you, Bob, Kent, and Elisa, Brett, Ryan, and Vicky for joining us tonight.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Kate. Thanks for
Thanks,
moderating.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.